Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So what I'm gonna do today, I will talk about a topic called um, the web accessibility and the things you should consider when you're designing for a web, right? So in simple terms, when you build a website, right, or a solution, the things you should pay attention to, right? We're gonna look at it um, from a Salesforce perspective and from a non-Salesforce perspective, right? So when you build a website, right, what's the first thing you should keep into consideration? The first thing is the usability, right? The web page should be usable, easily scrollable, right? And it should not clutter the screen, right? The icons and the colors and the font should be of decent size so that anyone can read it, because what happens, right? If you put a very tiny font, right, even the people who got no issues with eyesight, right, they will struggle to read the content as well. So you need to factor that, right? And you should not put too fancy font which started giving people headache, right? There are certain fonts like um, I, I don't really remember the name. There's certain fonts it's really fancy, but you can't really read it. So, and also, when you build a website, right, you should not uh, build it only keeping the mouse movement into consideration, right? Because people might want shortcuts, they might want to use keyboards, right? For instance, you have a field. Let's take an example of a Salesforce record page, right? So let's log into Salesforce and let's look at it, right? Let's say uh, explain from that perspective. Okay, all right, it's gonna take a little bit longer to load than I anticipated. All right, so what I'll do, I will. Okay, let's take a look at the user interface perspective, right? Let's talk about that for a second. Now, if I look at it, right, let's say if I put you know SDF, nothing happens, right? And let's say if I put A, the shortcut keywords are not working, which is not really great. And can I put C for create? No. So, you know, when you build a website, right, sometimes user might expect, oh, when I press P, it should print it, right? Um, Most of the time it works, but sometimes it doesn't, right? So you should when you're designing a website, you should not only consider the mouse moment. Let's look at the account creation, right? This will surely work. Okay, new. All right. So if I say test, right now, I did tab. It moved to phone, right? I did tab again. So it understands the tab moment, right? So you might have a tab position 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So based on that, it will work. So that's great. So Salesforce have designed keeping mouse moments as well as the keyboard moment into consideration, which is great. And also, if you look at this specific page, right, it has an option to scroll down, which is great. Imagine if there is no vertical scroll bar, right? It would have been a nightmare, right? Because user won't even know what's going on. Um, so that's from a simple, web mouse and keyboard movement perspective. Now, think about a scenario, right? You're not always going to carry the laptop with you when you wanted to browse a website, right? You most likely might be using your tablet or your phone, right? So your website should be mobile ready, right? Or should be tablet ready, and it should uh, recognize the touch screen, right? So, for instance, in tablet, right? For instance, Samsung or Android, sorry, Samsung on or iOS um, tablet, Normally you can use stylus, you can use, touchscreen, right? So your website should be responsive to that. And most of pretty much every website works using tablet. But that being said, your design should be in such a way when it goes to mobile interface, it should shrink the interface to fit the mobile screen. It shouldn't be like a website um, which is all over the place and very hard to read, right? Like for instance, if you're using LinkedIn app, right? LinkedIn, you will get a mobile version of it when you try to view it using your cell phone or using your tablet. But when you try to view that using a desktop, it's an entirely different interface, right? It will give you a desktop view, right? Now, also one thing, from a Salesforce perspective, you're designing a page layout, right? Page layout is pretty like a component base, right? If you think about it. So you go to the page layout, um, edit page option, right? For instance, I'll show you. Let's look at this one, right? So if I go here and I say edit page, you can customize it the way the user wants, right? It's like a nice looking um, builder. I mean, those of you who never seen Salesforce before, I'm just going to like to use this as a page builder using which you can customize your page, right? So you can do that. You can drag and drop the component, right? It's like a component based architecture. So now, one thing you need to pay attention to that is, right, when you build any web page, right, it should have a section, it should have a header, it should have um, a content which makes sense to the user, right? It shouldn't be all over the place, right? Like, for instance, um, I look at this record page, right? You got a detail here, then you got a related, and then you got a news, right? Everything is organized, right? It's pretty well. So that's pretty important in my opinion, right? A website should be properly organized. Users shouldn't be, doing lots of click to achieve a simple task. That shouldn't be the case. Also, for blind people, right? You should pay attention to that, right? Blind people often use screen reader or other way to interact with the website. So if you're using a fancy image, right? And if it's not gonna do much, right? You don't have to be an interactive with that. But on the other hand, if you're using a fancy image, for instance, to do something like uh, setup or service setup, you should make sure that it should have an all text, right? Which, or for that matter, right? Any image, if you want to convey that information to the user, it should have all text so that user know what they're talking about. Otherwise, what will happen, right? Sometimes some of the screen readers might read the underlying HTML code, which makes no sense to the user, right? Like the source forward slash image, whatever, right? And the user must be thinking, I have no idea what the reader just said, right? And so that's very important, right? You need to factor different people into consideration. Also, like I said, some people might have an issue with the eyesight, so they are not comfortable with the small font. So you have to um, cater for them as well, right? Now, as far as the font is concerned, right? Most of the browser has this option, right? You can increase the zoom size, which is pretty cool, right? So yeah, the browser is one of the classic example which takes care of a lot of things for the user. So yeah, that's uh, the one thing I just wanted to discuss. And yeah, and this is the most important thing I would say, right? When you're designing for a web, it's important that you pay attention to all these options. It might sound pretty simple for you, right? You must be thinking, why this guy is even talking about it? Isn't it too obvious? It is obvious, but still, if you think about it, right, when a developer builds a website, right, the main priority of a developer is to build the functionality. And look and feel or accessibility may not be the first priority for a developer, um, because the way a developer uses the website is pretty different to a way a user interacts with the website. Remember that, because I'm a developer as well, right? I call myself developer all the time, right? I don't like to call myself an architect or enterprise architect because at the end of the day, right, I love to code, right? Architecture is a fancy term because being a developer, you need to know the underlying architecture very well. You need to have an understanding of architecture, how the stuff interact with different systems, right? And what about the scalability, the performance, security, all of the things you need to factor that, right? And yes, I love to talk about all of this stuff, but at the end of the day, I do is that code and I build solution for the customer, right? And I can talk about the solution. I can talk about things from a requirement perspective. I can talk about from a workshop perspective. Talk about from an integration perspective. A lot of things. But at the end of the day, I love to call myself developer. That's the way I like to be remembered once I'm gone. Um, so, so what I'm trying to get here is that, right? If you're building a web page, right, of building a solution, right, make sure that you're designing for accessibility, right? It's not only that one kind of user will be using it. There'll be different kinds of users, right? They will be using your solution, so you need to factor those, right? So that being said, I hope you guys have an amazing Thursday. Adios.